going on, guys? I'm Duke Lamastra. Thank you so much for visiting my channel. Thanks for clicking to watch this video. This video is all about the subject of fear. Fear can so easily get out of control. It often starts out as an emotion, something that we can quickly dismiss, but if we allow it to take root in our hearts, it can cause us to spiral out of control, and it can become something that's actually demonically powered that can really affect our lives and the way that we think and all kinds of stuff. So I'm gonna teach you in this video how to deal with that emotion, that initial reaction of fear quickly, so that you can move beyond it and embrace the grace of God and the truth of God for your life. So let's go. I want to thank you again for clicking to watch this video. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. It would really mean the world to me. And if you do subscribe, I would recommend tapping that little bell icon as well, because that'll make sure that you always get notified as soon as new episodes become available. I'm thinking a lot about the subject of fear because I'm seeing it all over the place. You've been seeing it too, all over social media, all over the media, on TV, and just talking to people. I'm hearing all over the place, people talking about how they're afraid, they're uncertain, they're not sure what's going to happen. Right now, in the midst of this video, just in case you're watching it at a later date, right now, this whole coronavirus thing is in full swing. It's really starting to hit home. Right now, they just suspended the NBA season. They suspended the NHL season. The MLB season suspension's right around the corner. All kinds of stuff going on. They're starting to cancel schools in like statewide. They're canceling schools. People can't go to schools. You can't go to museums. You can't buy toilet paper in the store. You can't buy. It's starting to where you can't get vegetables. All kinds of stuff is going on, and I understand how people feel. I understand the uncertainty of what's going on and that feeling of fear, of worry, of anxiety, of what's going to happen next. How far is this going to go? What if this doesn't happen? All those what ifs start. Those, what if this doesn't get better? What if it just keeps getting worse? What if we run out of food? What if we run out of this? What if I can't go to work? All this kind of stuff, all kinds of things. I know it's on people's minds. And so I just want to talk a little bit about the subject of fear. It really reminds me of several years back, 11 or so years ago, when my wife and I were serving in Mexico as missionaries, and this whole the H1N1 influenza, whatever it was, that was going on heavily at the time, especially where we were in Mexico, and it was the same kind of thing. For several weeks, everybody was walking around with the masks on. We couldn't have church services for a while, couldn't go in public venues and public places. Nobody, it was like, keep a 1.5 or 2 feet or whatever it was distance. Don't shake anybody's hand. Don't touch anybody. All that kind of stuff. It was the same kind of thing going on. And when you look around and you see the way that people are acting and you see the way things are going, it kind of feels like we're in a zombie apocalypse right now. It kind of feels like, we've seen this movie before, right? Like, we've seen movies that have started just like this and did not turn out well at all. And so there's definitely that sense of unrest, uncertainty, wondering what's going to happen. It leads to worry, it leads to anxiety, it leads to fear. But I want to tell you very, very clearly from the Word of God, 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 7 says, God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. God has not given you a spirit of fear. He's never given you a spirit of fear, and He never will give you a spirit of fear. In other words, fear does not come from God. Fear does not stem from who God is, from His nature. Fear is completely contrary to the nature of God, to the way that God thinks. There's a verse that I love in Isaiah chapter 51. It's verse 12. And God is talking, and He says, I am the one who comforts you. Who are you to be afraid? I love that verse because God is not giving us leeway here to be afraid, to deal with fear, to allow fear to control our lives. And that's what happens when you give into fear. It becomes a controlling force in your life. It can become a controlling force, a demonically empowered force that manipulates you and that runs your life, controls your life, keeps you stagnant, keeps you stationary, keeps you from doing things, keeps you from enjoying life, keeps you from taking risk and being adventurous and all that kind of stuff that's necessary for this faith walk that we're living out. Listen, you do not have time for fear. You don't have time for anxiety. You don't have time for worry. It's not worth your time. God's like, who are you to be afraid? I'm the one who comforts you. Like, don't you recognize how big I am? Don't you remember how good I am? How faithful I've been? How many times I've come through for you? How many times I've showed you how good I am to you, that I've never let you down? I've given you promise after promise that I will never leave you. I'll never forsake you. I've showed you who I am through different things, through different circumstances. Like, you've seen it, right? You've seen it. We've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen how good he is, how faithful he is. And yet we can so often just find ourselves falling back into fear, falling back into worry and anxiety and all that kind of stuff that completely undermines our position as sons and daughters of God. And God is like, look, I'm not letting you off the hook here. Who are you to be afraid? Why should you be afraid? You have no right to be afraid. You have no reason to be afraid, because I am the God who comforts you. When we remember who God is in the midst of whatever that situation is that's causing us to be afraid, that's causing us to be anxious, causing us to spiral out of control, when we take a moment and we step back and we remember who God is, how good he is, how big he is, how faithful he is, then we have to recognize that there is no situation that we find ourselves in right now, and there's no situation that we're ever going to go through or find ourselves in, that he is not big enough, that he's not good enough to see us through and to move us above and beyond that situation. In other words, there's nothing that you're going through right now, and I understand that you might be going through something real and something serious. I get it, all right? And I'm not undervaluing that or anything at all. I want you to hear my heart on this. It's not worth you getting into fear, because whatever it is, no matter how big it is, how bad it is, or how bad it seems, God is bigger. He's bigger, and his goodness is above it, and his faithfulness is beyond it. So we need to keep our perspective right. We need to keep our eyes fixed on God in the midst of every storm, in the midst of everything that we're going through. David said in Psalm 23, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." David recognized that as he was walking through this thing that he was going through, that there was no fear that had any place in his life, because he was trusting in God. He started off that passage, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," or "I shall not lack for anything that I need." God, I'm looking to you. My eyes are on you. And so even though, I'm walking through this thing, this valley of the shadow of death, as he called it, as I'm walking through this thing, look, there is nothing around me. There's nothing going on around me. None of these shadows around me. There's nothing that deserves my attention more than you, God. So when I keep my focus on you, I can keep walking through this thing, even though, it's scary and it's uncertain. Listen, you and I, as believers, as sons and daughters of God, we cannot afford to live our lives based on facts, quote unquote. We need to live our lives based on truth. And let me tell you what the difference is there. Because it's a fact that people all over the world are getting sick right now. And it's a fact that there are people that are dying right now. And it might be a fact that you are going through something in your own personal life or your family or whatever. It might be a fact that there was a negative medical diagnosis, or it might be a fact that you are working on a project that you've tried before and failed. I get all of it, all right? I'm not denying the facts. I'm not denying that these things are real and that they're happening. But the truth of God is higher than the facts that we see going on around us. And when we base our lives on what we see in the natural, then we're always going to get into fear. We're always going to get into anxiety, and we're always going to start to worry, and we're just not going to go through and go after the things that God has showed us, and we're going to get stagnated, and we're going to get stationary, and we're going to get distracted, and we're going to spiral into that thing of fear, and we're going to lose our grip on the promises of God for our lives. Because the truth of God says that he saved us, that he redeemed us, that he will never leave us, that he'll never forsake us, that he's our healer, that he's our provider, that he's everything that we need. We have truth to stand on that goes so far beyond the facts of what we see in front of us. And we have to live our lives based on the truth of God's word. Your faith is grounded in the truth of what God has promised. And so recognizing this, God's like, who are you to be afraid? Like, don't you know who I am? Don't you know what I'm capable of? Don't you know how good I am? Haven't you seen this time and time again? So why are you allowing fear to grip your heart? Why are you spiraling out of control? Why are you allowing this thing to happen? God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Now listen, there's an emotion of fear that I understand. Fear very often begins as an emotion. It begins as a normal reaction to something that's going on, all right? So you get a bill in the mail that you weren't expecting and you don't have the money to pay it, or you get served with a lawsuit, or the car breaks down, or whatever it is, the stuff that we deal with in regular life. We go through life and we experience these things, and the initial sort of reaction a lot of times is fear, or it's worry. It's that question, that what if? Oh, what if I can't pay this bill? What if I lose my house, and what if this happens, and what if I get sick, and so many things, they start to go through our minds, and we all know what it's like to go through that process of worry and that downward spiral where things just get worse and worse and worse. We all understand that. We all know what that is. But the problem is that fear can very quickly become demonically empowered when we give it too much time to germinate on the inside of us. So we get that initial reaction of, oh, what if this happens? We need to learn to snap ourselves out of that mindset quickly and be like, oh, wait, hold on. Yeah, you know what? I don't have the money to pay this bill right now, but guess who does? God does, right? Because he's our provider, because he already knew that you were going to get that letter in the mail way before you got it. Like, he knew about it. He knew that that thing was coming. He knew all this stuff's going on. He's not falling off of his throne. He's not forgetting who he is. He's not running out of power. I promise you, God is not running short on power. He's not running short on provision, on resources. He's not running out of ideas for how to get you through. He's like, oh man, you know, my son here has had so many problems and I've bailed him out so many times before, but I'm running short on ideas. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. I'm not sure. God's not like that, obviously, and we know that. But I understand that when we're in the midst of the situation, so many times that's all that we can see, because we focus on what's in front of us, and what we focus on expands to the point that we forget about how good and how big and faithful and powerful God really is. So yeah, he's bigger than all of it, and he has not given you a spirit of fear. Fear doesn't come from God. Fear comes from the enemy. Listen, all fear is always based on a lie. It's always based on a lie. Fear is always based on the assumption. Listen, we talked about facts and truth and all that. Fear might be based on facts. Like, yeah, we already talked about that. The fact says this. And yeah, that's a real thing that's going on. That's actually happening. Okay, we get that. And so fear stems from that. Fear stems from the, okay, this is happening. So now what if this happens? Or what if it happens to me? Or what if it happens to my family? Or what if it happens to someone whatever. And so we get into that what if thing. All of that is assuming that God is not big enough or good enough or strong enough or faithful enough to see you beyond it. That's why it's a lie. That's why it's based on a lie, because it's making the assumption that it's bigger than the God that we know, and the God that we serve, and the God that loves us, and the God that already looked ahead and knew that all this was coming in the first place anyway, right? My favorite definition for fear ever comes from the great Zig Ziglar, and he defined fear this way as an acronym. He said, fear is false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. I think that is so true, because what the enemy does is he presents a case in front of you, or he presents something in front of you, some facts or whatever. Something happens in your life, something goes wrong, or you're reminded of something that went wrong in the past or whatever, and then this fear thing starts. And if it's an emotion that we can deal with quickly and remind ourselves how big God is, remind ourselves who we are, that we're sons and daughters of the Most High God, that He loves us, that He died for us, that He's secured our freedom and our security and our peace and all this kind of stuff, then we can quickly move beyond it. But if we allow that thing to take root inside of us, then it becomes what the Bible refers to in the verse that we already talked about, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, the spirit of fear. And God has not given you a spirit of fear. It doesn't come from God. Anytime that you find yourself walking through fear, living in fear, dealing with anxiety, dealing with worry, you can rest assured that that thing did not come from God. And if it didn't come from God, then it has no place in your life, because you're a child of God, made in His image, born again, born from above. You have a new nature, and your new nature, your born again nature as a child of the Most High God, fear is not a part of that. Fear is not a part of who you are. So guess what that means? That means that you can let fear go. It means that you don't have to keep it for yourself. It means that when fear rears its ugly head at you, that when you get into that spiral of fear, you can remind yourself, hold on a second, guess what? I'm actually a child of God. And guess what? God is actually still on His throne. And so even though this is uncertain to me, and even though I don't know how this is all going to play out, I know that I can keep trusting in Him, because He's always shown Himself faithful to me. You can let go of the fear and embrace and remind yourself of the fact that this is what He's given you: power, love, and a sound mind. Power, the dunamis of God. You have the power of God, the very ability of God at work in you. The same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead works in you. Ephesians 3:20 says, "Now to Him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ask or think, according to the power that works in us." The power of God, the ability of God is at work in you. He's given you power. He's given you love. Now look, perfect love casts out fear. Fear and love do not coexist, because whenever love shows up, fear has to flee from it. Fear has to go, because God is love. So love is the perfect weapon against fear. So He's given you power, He's given you love, and He's given you a sound mind. Sound mind means self-control or self-discipline. It's the ability to bring your mind and your thinking back into proper alignment with His way of thinking and with the Word of God, with the will of God, with the promises of God for your life. You have that ability. Why? Because the Spirit of God lives on the inside of you. And so whenever you find yourself spiraling into that downward thing of fear or worry or whatever it is that's got you uneasy and that's got you confused, that's got you feeling uncertain about your circumstances or whatever it is that you're going through, you can remind yourself, hold on a second, I actually have the power of God working in my life. I have the love of the Father working in my life. And I have the ability to bring my mindset, to shift my mindset, and to bring my thinking into alignment with His. You are not out of control. Even though your circumstances are out of control, the enemy is not controlling you. He does not have that kind of authority over you. And so the moment you realize it and you recognize who you are and who your God is, you have the ability to elevate your perspective, your focus, your vision, to see beyond what's in front of you and to see what God sees. 2 Corinthians Chapter 4, verse 18 says, "While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are unseen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are unseen are eternal." The things that are in front of you right now, the problems and the situations and the messes and the stuff that's causing that fear, that's causing that anxiety, all of it, all of that stuff, every bit of it is temporary. It's all temporary. And that fear that you're feeling as a result of it is based on a lie. It's based on the lie that says that this is going to be forever. This is going to be your downfall. This is going to end it all for you. God's not big enough to get you out of this. You're not good enough to get out. Like all of that stuff, it's all based on a lie. And guess what? It's not worth it, because you can let it go. You can let go of the fear and embrace the grace of God, the love of God, the power of God that works within you. All of that. Embrace who God is, the truth of God's word, because the truth trumps the facts every single day of the week. the truth of who God is, the truth of the fact that he came to save you, to give you security, to give you a place of refuge in him, a hiding place in him, that he came to give you divine health, to keep you in divine health, to give you healing, to give you provision, to give you all of the things that you need. That is the truth that you can stand on. And instead of spiraling out of control into fear, you embrace the grace of God. You remember the promises of God. You remember who God is and who you are. And you say, you know what? Not today. I'm not going to allow this to tear me down. I'm not going to get into fear, but I'm going to remember who you are, God, in the midst of this. Because I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. But guess what? I'm not fearing any evil because I know that you're with me. You can't even imagine what that does to the enemy. It's terrifying because they know that they've lost. They know that they've lost. They know that they have absolutely nothing. The enemy, the devil, he has nothing on you because the power of God works within you. So look, just embrace it. Embrace who God is. Remember who you are. When you're tempted, because that's what it is, it's a temptation. When you're tempted to spiral out of control into fear, when you have a situation come up and you have that initial reaction, that initial response, that initial emotion of fear, just catch it quickly and snap out of it. Shift your mindset. Remind yourself who you are, who God is. If you have to think back to something that God did for you before, to a situation that you went through before, and remember that God brought you through that. If he brought you through that, of course he's going to bring you through this, because it's just the nature of who he is. He doesn't change. He doesn't stop being good. He's actually bringing you into greater and better and bigger things. He's not sending you backwards. And so when you start to see something that causes there to be worry or anxiety, remember who you are. Remember who God is.